Welcome, everyone, to Huddle Up with Gus, where we talk to our guests about how sports shape their life. I'm your host, Gus Frerotte, 15-year NFL quarterback, and I'm joined by my longtime friend and co-host, Dave Hager. You can now find us under the big top with the Sports Circus and Ringmaster Sal. Look for us on AMP TV, AAMPTV.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Huddle Up with Gus. I'm your host, Gus Frerotte, 15-year NFL quarterback. I'm usually joined by my co-host, Dave, but Dave is not with me today, so I'll be running this episode solo. I'm pretty excited about that. Today's guest, Jim Rooney. You probably definitely know the last name, but Jim has been around, obviously one of the Rooneys, part of the Steelers family. For a long time, wrote an incredible book called A Different Way to Win about his father, and the stories in it are incredible. We're going to get a little bit of those in later, but today's guest, Jim Rooney, thanks for joining us, Jim, and glad to have you on Huddle Up with Gus.
Gus, it's great to see you, great to be here. Love to see a Pittsburgh kid from the football world doing well, so great to be part of the project.
We're doing okay. I need a little bit of a haircut, but other than that, once I can go get a haircut, I'll feel a lot better.
I'm lucky.
Yeah, you're lucky. You got a little razor. You can do that work. So how we always start the show, we want to find out a little bit about you and your childhood and that first memory that you have. And I probably can guess what it is, but the first memory you have of why you fell in love with sports.
Well, Gus, I was born into it. There's not much I could say. I've had this fantastic life because of this industry, and it's been a blessing. I guess the story, though, that I remember most, that is the sort of introduction is, my family would always go to these games and come back, 5 hours later, and so there's 9 of us. I'm the 8th of 9, and me and my sister Joan would be babysat because we were too young to go to the games. And so there was this game around Christmas time, and they all came back, and everyone was crying and cheering. And my brother Dan, who's about 5 years older than me, picked me up and hugged me. My mother grabbed me and hugged me. And that was the day of the Immaculate Reception. So I was 5 or 6 years old, didn't go. But 3 hours later, the way they came into the house was about as happy as I'd ever seen, my family.
Oh, I couldn't even imagine that. I mean, that's a great memory. So you being one of 9, you had you had a team right there. So I couldn't imagine what it was like for you guys. If you were bored, Dad would just send you outside, go play ball in the street or do something like that. What did you guys do when you were young, when you were growing up? What was your game of choice?
Well, so we played football every single day, and we had so there was 9 of us, 4 boys, and my younger sister, and 2 of my sisters were probably better than all of us. Had we been, 30 years later, they would have been the star athletes. And we had a family whose uncle actually was Pete Flaherty, the mayor. Their name was Smith, and their Billy Conn, the great boxer, was their uncle. They were all great athletes. A couple of them went to Stanford, and a couple other places played football. So there was 5 of them, 9 of us, and we played football every single day. I remember one day my father comes home, so you're thinking the good side of the story, but we're outside playing with this football, and I got it out of his closet. And so we're playing, and he goes, "Where did you get that ball?" And it's an NFL ball. And I said, I got it out of the closet. And he gave it to me. I mean, he was so upset. Well, it was the game ball from Super Bowl 13, and he just meant to get it painted, and he never, just didn't get around to it because he had a million things going on. So we scraped that ball up a little bit playing football in the street.
Did he still get it painted?
He did get it painted, and we never touched it again after that.
I could imagine. I mean, for me growing up, I grew up in Ford City and Fort Cliff. We rode our bikes, go get all the kids in the neighborhood. We had a ball field we went to, and we had a basketball court. We played everything. I mean, as long as you have a place to play. Did you guys play wiffle ball at all?
We played wiffle ball. We played, baseball. It was such a good time because you played 3 sports. And I wasn't very good at them. I had friends who played basketball and wrestling in the winter, in addition to football and baseball. So, that was such a great time that you just played. And I think and again, my athletic ability is limited, but we were better in, I think, a lot of ways. We may not have been conditioned, and we may not have known the strategy the same way, but you had to play all three sports. You learned moves in basketball that would help you not get tackled. In football, you learned eye coordination, hitting the ball. In baseball, that helped you catch a football. And look, the world is the world. I'm glad that where we're at, but I do think there's something missing where we don't have the three sport world anymore.
No, I totally agree. And I think the other thing too is missing is, when you went out with all those people and you played in the streets, you had to be the referee, the coach. There were no parents around. There were no other people telling you how to pick teams and all that. And you figured those things out on your own. And I thought that's such a valuable lesson that our kids today kind of miss.
Well, absolutely. My brother Dan, who I mentioned before, he's a scout for the Steelers, lives down in North Carolina. He's actually the guy that found Willie Parker when we were talking about scouting people. But Dan beat the crap out of me so many times if I dropped the ball. I don't know if you guys did this, but you'd have one series, and if you had 3 receptions, you got a first down.
Yep.
So if I dropped a ball on that 3rd reception, man, it was the worst thing in the world because my brother beat the crap out of me for that. So
that's pretty good. Yeah, that's usually how it went. Yeah, that's usually how it went. But I think that kids don't learn those types of things. It just respect. When you're the younger one, you got to respect the older one, and the older one has to take care of the younger ones too, even though they may be tough on you. But nobody's going to be a bully to my kid on my team, right? And that's kind of how it went. I think we missed some of that today, and I just enjoyed sports my whole life the same way you did. We grew up in a town that had a lot of kids, and we just went out and we played and we had a lot of fun. And yeah, sometimes you got in a brawl, but the thing about it was you just left it go and you went right back and started playing again.
We'd get in fights, to go home for lunch. The kids that fought, after lunch, they'd be on the same team, and you were ready to go. I mean, you never, my best friends I fought with more than anyone else I've ever fought with in my life, and they're my best friends today,
Right. So your family has a little bit of boxing history. Did any of you or your brother and sister, anybody ever do any boxing?
So that's a great question, Gus. I remember I was going to join this boxing club, and it's really a touching thing. Actually, every time I tell this story, I kind of tear up, and I understand it now even more so. And so I'm joining this boxing club, and my mother thought this would be good athletically. I have diabetes, so everything about it was sort of good. And my grandfather stepped in, Art Rooney, the chief, and he said, he's not boxing. And my mother said, that would be good for him. He said, I boxed so these kids would never have to. And, it still gets me. Like, the sacrifice that boxers make is like no other, and that. And his willingness to really own that was his life, that he did that, for the next generations of his family. And that's the American dream. These folks that are, 100 years ago now took on responsibilities and sacrifices in ways that, are just amazing. And look, I've benefited, my family has benefited, but my grandfather, who started the team and really started us in the sports industry, it wasn't easy. It wasn't always fun. It was, it wasn't romantic, and that's part of the path.
Yeah, I know. I completely get it. Did your grandfather ever talk about who his favorite boxer was?
Well, his favorite boxer was Billy Conn, the Pittsburgh kid,
right,
who he was his promoter with.
Okay.
But he had, the one thing that isn't talked about in the history of Art Rooney as much is my grandfather promoted the first fight between 2 African Americans for an open heavyweight championship at Forbes Field in 1952, I believe. Jersey Joe Wolcott and Ezra Charles. It was when Joe Louis retired. My grandfather was the promoter of the fight to win the heavyweight championship after that. So he actually did a lot in boxing in those early days, and then kind of it went to Vegas and sort of beyond Pittsburgh. But Pittsburgh was a great fight town. I got to think there had to be some great boxers up in Armstrong County, and I bet he helped promote them or so. I mean, he was heavily involved through the 20s, 30s, 40s in boxing.
Yeah, there's some great little boxing clubs around the Pittsburgh area. I mean, I've been to a few recently where those boxing clubs are still going, and you can go see a match for charity and different things like that, and they're kind of fun. My wife always gets nervous. She doesn't want anybody to get hurt, but I said, most of them are, if they're younger, they're wearing the headsets and everything. But, boxing, it's kind of a remarkable story about your grandfather, how he was so into boxing. It seems like sometimes when you get ingrained in boxing, it's hard to pull yourself away. And then how he switched and said, okay, I'm going to get into football when it wasn't even, I mean, there were a lot of strifes and hardships back then with football.
Well, it's funny. I've been speaking to students throughout this. I've talked to about 10 different sports industry, sports business students, in these schools across the country. They're the sports management program throughout this sort of COVID experience. And, in all of them, I said, look, my grandfather, we own this business now that's, unbelievably, valuable, whatever they call it. But my grandfather got into it because it was during the Depression. He would have preferred to buy a baseball team, but he could never afford to do that. He got into the Steelers because it cost nothing to get in,
Right.
And he got lucky. And I've been telling these kids, like, look, think about the sports industry. Think about what's going on with things that like you and I are doing, these online things. Is there a way you can create a new type of engagement with the fans? Is there something you can invent? Is there something you can get into now while there's some tough times around parts of the industry, because this is going to be a great opportunity 10, 15 years from now, and that's certainly the path my grandfather took. But boxing fed him until the mid 50s. I mean, really was my father who took the Steelers business and made it successful. My grandfather's success in business really was much more in boxing than it ever really was in football.
Yeah, I just interviewed Steve Lott. He was, I don't know if you know who Steve is, but he has the Boxing Hall of Fame online, and he was assistant manager with Tyson, and he has 75 years of boxing footage that he actually owns. And we had a great conversation about boxing, and man, his knowledge of it was incredible. And he goes the whole way back into the 20s and 30s and how it started and how our country fell in love with it. And he was talking about, I think it was, who was it fighting over in Ireland? Was it Ireland they were fighting? I can't remember who it was, but he said the president called him and said, your country is betting on you. It may have been Joe Louis. I'm not sure who was fighting at that time. But
right.
He said, the president calls you and says, hey, your country is behind you. We want you to win. Like, you got to win that round, right? You're fighting somebody from Europe, and it's like, okay, this is a big match. And boxing is just such ingrained into our history. I think it was just incredible that now it's all flipped. Like, boxing was bigger, football wasn't as big, and it's all just kind of taken a different turn. And it's amazing that the long game that your family had to look at that and see that as this is something that we think is going to work.
Well, my father, I think Dan Rooney did a lot for the business of the whole sports industry, but particularly as it relates to the NFL. When you look at the labor agreements, he was the first owner way ahead on labor. My grandfather Art actually is the guy who made the proposal in a league meeting that there be a players union in 1957. And then my father, was the chief negotiator. And, he was the first one that understood free agency is going to come. We have to find a way to create competitive balance and keep the game interesting for our fans. But you can't not let the players have some degree of movement. And, he was talking about that in the mid 70s. And you didn't get free agency until 93, but it was that approach to business that my father always looked at. Look, let's grow this pie as large as we can, and that's going to happen best if we're all willing to share, whether it was the revenue sharing between the teams or free agency with the players. Look, the NFL has gone through the roof, and there were certainly a lot of people involved, but I always feel that sort of steady hand. My father would be as tough as he could be in certain negotiations, but he always looked at the big picture and understood that you have to treat people well. And if you did that, I contribute that to so much of the reason the NFL has become what it's become.
Right. You're listening to Huddle Up with Gus Frerotte, and we're here with Jim Rooney. And you can catch us on radio.com or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, and on AMP TV, AAMP.TV. So, Jim, let's go back. I think your family, everybody in your family all went to the same high school. Am I correct?
We actually didn't. We all went to different high schools.
Really? I thought you guys were all North Catholic kind of
So the generation before us did. So my dad and his brothers, they all went to North. And then my mother wanted us to go to some other schools. So Art and I, who's the president, my brother Art, went to a school called Gilmore Academy, which is a Holy Cross Brothers school. Notre Dame actually owned this school. It's in Ohio back in the day, and my son actually went there. And then my brothers Dan and John went to other schools. All my sisters had to go to the all-girls Catholic school near our house, and my brothers and I were going to these other places. But but North is an important part of our family, and they've done a great thing.
Right, now they've even moved further north.
Yes.
It used to be a lot closer for you guys. But what was it like for you when you went to Gilmore? I mean, you're away from home. Was it like a boarding school almost?
Yeah, as I said, Art and I lived in dorms, and I guess Dan did as well. And so my mother felt that anonymity would be a good thing for us in high school. That the idea of everyone sort of knowing the Rooney story is great, and we're very grateful for the life we have in Pittsburgh. But during that time, sort of this critical time, she thought that would happen. Well, she sends us to school that is basically in Cleveland. And everyone there knows the Rooneys, but they hate us. We say, you could have sent us in the middle of Indiana or something, but so we put up with a lot of abuse for many, many years going to Browns games, and I was there during right before you started the NFL when Bernie was sort of tearing up the league.
Yeah,
the Browns had some good teams, late '80s, early '90s, and
they sure did.
They were beating the Steelers all the time when I was in high school.
So, did you play sports in high school? 3 sports again?
Yeah, I played varsity football. I'm about 5'8", but I played defensive back. I got a letter when I was a sophomore, and I played catcher. But I just didn't have the arm after JV. I love baseball. I just didn't have the arm to gun that ball down to second well enough. So they basically said, you can play second base or get out of here. And I think I played one more year at second base, but I just wasn't good enough.
Right, it's a tough sport. I mean, you got to have all the talent, and you got to build that cake. And if you're missing something little, I mean, for me, baseball was a mental game for me. Where I had an arm to be able to throw the ball, but mentally pitching, where everybody thought I would, be 6'5", standing on the mound and throw a 90-mile-an-hour fastball, but mentally, to do it for 6 or 7 innings, I just wasn't there yet as a kid, and I just didn't like it, and that's why baseball. I mean, luckily I could hit okay, but other than that, so did you ever have that problem where I'm playing against, you're playing against schools up in Cleveland, I'm sure, and they said, "Oh, those are the Rooney boys. We're going to go after them."
Oh yeah, that happened in football all the time. I had kids. I was defensive back and a running back, and I had people jumping on the pile, taking shots, all the time. And I was a little bit like Deion Sanders. I wore number 21, and I was always talking crap to these kids about the Steelers won all these Super Bowls.
Right.
And, like I was always I was that little guy that had too big a mouth, and I paid for it more often than I should have.
Yeah, but you know what? I think that's kind of fun. I think that's kind of what you had to do. If I was in your shoes, I probably would have done the same thing. Like, you got to stick up for yourself, especially when you're not at your home. You're away, and it's you and your brothers, and you got to kind of say, all right, we're going to go out and do this thing, and we're going to stick up for where we're from. And I think that's that pride that comes out in you.
I had this huge Steelers stadium coat. Those coats that go down to your ankles?
Oh, yeah.
So, it's always cold in Cleveland. You played some games up there. So I'd get about 10 seats. It was awesome. We'd go down to Municipal Stadium. I'd get a row, and I'd take all my teammates to the game. And they're always like, you have to wear the jacket. And every time people would start throwing beer. And these guys are all Browns fans, and they end up having to be in fights in the stadium because I'm wearing the Steeler jacket. And they're just like, can't you just leave it in the car today? And I'm like you. I'm like, I'm not backing down, And they're like, yeah, but we all have to fight for you.
Right, yeah, they got to stick up for you. When I would go play in Philadelphia, I would always kind of, when I'd get tickets for friends and family, I say, look, I know you guys want to wear – I was with the Redskins, played for the Vikings. We went there. I said, I know you want to wear our colors and my jersey and all that, but maybe you should just wear like a kind of a bland coat over top of it, because those Eagles fans are kind of nuts. I'm sure that's a similar story that you had there. And I'm sure, I've been to a lot of games here in Pittsburgh too, and the Steelers fans are a little bit like that, but they're not as bad as other places I've been.
Yeah, Cleveland's tough and Baltimore's tough. Philly's the worst. I went to a Flyers game, playoff game against the Pens once, and same thing. I mean, we were adults, but there was about 8 of us in this row, and I'm like, man, I'm sitting on the end of this row. This is not a comfortable feeling in Philadelphia,
Start your day sunny side up at the Westin Bonaventure Hotel and Suites and enjoy breakfast for 2 on us. No matter how you plan to spend your trip to Los Angeles, start every day with a hearty meal to kickstart your morning. Enjoy breakfast for 2 on us each day you stay. For reservations, be sure that promo code S4B appears in the promo code box when making your online reservation at Marriott.com/LAXBW or call 1-800-228-9290 and ask for a promotional code S4B.
Oh, yeah. So Dante Culpepper, if you remember him, a quarterback, we were together in the Vikings. We go play in a playoff game in Philly. And the team's even warning us, like, if your family's coming, I know they want to, they're proud of you. They want to wear your stuff. And I can remember Dante's mom saying, no, I'm supporting my son wearing all this stuff. And I forget how many beers she had thrown on her. Like, they had to escort so many people out of her section. It got really ugly. I mean, Philadelphia that's why they had a jail in the prison or in the stadium, I guess.
Well, that franchise is the franchise my grandfather started. So in 1948, we switched. There was some big thing after the war and financing. So the guy bought the Steelers for my grandfather, and he was going to move them to Boston, and my grandfather was going to partner with Bert Bell in Philadelphia. And he decided he wanted to go to Philadelphia. And my dad convinced Bert Bell to come to Pittsburgh. We never missed a season, but there was actually a time when there might not have been football in Pittsburgh. We would have been involved in Philadelphia. So the franchise that is the Steelers actually is the original Eagles, and the Eagles are the original Steelers. Not too many people know that fact.
No, that makes the rivalry go way back then.
Right.
Yeah. So after high school, you graduate from Gilmore. What was your next step for you?
So I was one of those kids, another guy that inspired sort of that lifetime you and I had in those late 80s. I'll never forget this game. It was the Friday after Thanksgiving, 1985 or 6. I'm watching Boston College and this little quarterback throw this pass.
Right.
And so I ended up going to BC, loved BC, had a great time up in Boston. Never picked up a football there. Couldn't get near that team, but it was a great place to be, and actually became buddies for a while with, I think, a guy you were teammates with in. Were you ever teammates with Romanowski?
Yeah.
So yeah, Romo and I were buddies for a little bit. I think he was a year ahead of me, and we just became friends because of different things, but I loved Romo,
Yeah, Romo was great. People really had issues with him, but I never did. We always kind of sat by each other on the planes when we played together on the Broncos.
Right,
and
right.
Bill always had this big suitcase with him, right? And they all had all kind of pills and creams, and I remember I can't remember who we were playing, but I got my elbow was just killing me because I got hit. And I said, Romo, you got anything for me? And he gave me this cream out of an old oil Valet jar, and he said, look, this plant was picked under a full moon with no clouds in the sky. We made it into a cream. It's going to help your elbow. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I hope I don't have to drug test next week.
And look, there's the drug side, but people that aren't in locker rooms, and look, I was a ball boy, etc. You were a player, but don't realize there's always one or two of those superstitious guys, and they got the craziest stuff in the world going on there. And it's always so funny. Like, I remember being a ball boy with those carts where we'd be picking up all the socks and jocks. And, Sidney Thornton was the famous guy. But we had 2 or 3 of those guys, and like if you wheel past them at a certain time, they get upset at you. If you put the thing on the right side rather than left, they were going to have a bad practice.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't even go near any of those, any of the superstitious guys.
I never had. Like, for me, it was too much energy to do all that stuff. Like, I've seen guys, like, lay out their whole uniform on the ground in front of their locker before the game so they can see how it's going to look when it's on their body. And I'm like, what? Like,
Right.
I'm worried about, like, okay, if I see a cover 2 defense, and then all of a sudden they rotate them, I got to go this way on my read. I wasn't worried about how my socks looked.
Right, exactly. One last superstitious story going back to my grandfather's time in the boxing. So, he would always take a priest with him whenever he went anywhere,
Right.
and they'd take 2 or 3 friends. Usually, some cops were with them. And they always went to boxing. They always had horse racing, and boxing. And so, a boxer does the sign of the cross before he gets in the ring. And one of his buddies, who I think was a cop, said to the priest, "Hey, do you think that'll help?" And the priest said, "Only if he can fight." And I always thought that was the best answer to superstition. You better be able to do the thing, let alone, just the superstitious.
Well, when I was reading your book, and you were telling some of those stories about boxing, about your grandfather and who used to go to the matches. And I'm like, well, I wonder if those same people would go to the matches today. I wonder if it's filled with priests and Catholics and everybody. I'm thinking, nah, not in Vegas. I don't think they're all out in Vegas watching boxing matches anymore. But, it just tells you how the world's changed.
Well, and I also think it was such a great immigrant story. And so maybe the immigrants of today who come from other countries have that experience. I mean, boxing I think it's the ultimate tough guy experience, and if you have nothing and you're willing to fight for it, I don't think there's a better way to do it. And that's what my grandfather's generation, what we're doing as Irish, and I think, so I wonder if that's how it is, because that was their day, and that was how they stepped into, sports and politics were how the Irish, the Italians, so many folks, that's how we got into, sort of normal society, or finally got accepted.
Right, exactly. And I think that, it's amazing that, when reading your book and thinking about everything that your family has done and come through, there's been a lot of similar people that have come through Pittsburgh. My family's family immigrants. My dad was one of 15, right? Yeah. And, and they did things just to survive and make money, and they were all in the military and do those types of things. And the vision that your dad, your grandfather loved sports. And, not just boxing, but everything. And then he said, this is what I want to do, even though it probably was tough times for him, trying to find the money to buy a team and then do all those things. But he knew that someday that was going to be valuable for his family, and what a family you guys have built. So after college, you go to BC. I think you graduated, what was it in? Communications?
Political science and communications.
Right. So why did you pick those two?
Well, I picked political science because my grandfather always said, you should get in politics. You're good with talking with people. He always had good relationships with people in politics, and he was the only one I've ever seen in my life, including my father, who ended up doing okay in that world, named ambassador. But my grandfather was the only one I ever knew that had no political enemies. I mean, everyone on every side of the aisle just liked my grandfather. He could deal with them. He could get deals done for his business, but stay out of their business, and just was fantastic at doing that. So he thought that the communications, I just, I don't know why I did that. I guess it just, I felt like I think it was one of the things where I got 5 classes in and was like, okay, if I take 3 more, I'll get the double major.
Right. No, that's great. So when you get out, of college, what were the plans? Like, I mean, your family is so ingrained in this, and your dad is now running the Steelers. And what were your plans? Did he have some conversations with you about your next step in life?
I mean, my father and I had great conversations. Really, I mean, it's why I wrote the book and felt like I had a point of view that was different. Starting in college, I was talking to him on the phone every night, and then when I got home, we'd talk every night. I don't know that we ever said, "Hey, here's a plan. Let's go forward with this." It was always talking about, this is going on in Ireland. Commissioner Tagliabue's doing this. This young guy Roger Goodell's doing that. A lot about Coach Noel and how Coach Noel just had. He always said, like, look, Coach Noel was my father's best partner, and he said, everyone's wrong in life. I'm not going to tell you he's not, but he said that man has the most integrity I've ever seen in my life. So just learning from these people, Pete Rozelle, just the greatest visionary of all time, understood where the NFL was going. I actually went to Chile in South America for the first 2 years after college and worked with children with diabetes. I've had diabetes now for 45 years. And my father was a big supporter of doing something like that. He said, look, everyone wants to get on a career path, and that's a great thing. You are fortunate, and really I was sort of concerned whether it was the right thing to do or not. And he said that would be just a tremendous experience. So I lived in Chile working with children with diabetes in a third world country, which is really interesting because diabetes doesn't sort of discriminate. So we had kids that had nothing and would have to sharpen their needles on a rock. And we had kids who had more money, because there's money in the third world. It's a little different. If you have it, you have all of it. And they have power that you can't even think of here. So just these really interesting dynamics with people and then, helping them deal with this disease in a way that, was humbling because we are, look, there's certainly many people in America that struggle, and we try to do everything we can to be of support. But the third world is, it's just hard to imagine. And having a chronic illness in a place like that, it's really unimaginable in a certain way. I mean, people get medicines. There's 20 different types of insulin. These guys would get one bottle for 3 months and have to make it last. Where I have 10 bottles in my fridge now for the next 4 months. So. Just very humbling experience, and my father really encouraged and supported me doing that.
No, that's wonderful. We're joined by Jim Rooney, writer of A Different Way, a great book about his father Dan Rooney that he wrote with his brother Art. I mean, what a better conversation for me as a Pittsburgher to have. I'm so excited about this. You can listen to this podcast on radio.com and find us on AMTV. So, Jim, one of the biggest things I think out of that book, and one of the things that your family was about was inclusion and diversity and how important that was and how that came to be the Rooney Rule. Did you guys have many conversations about those types of things?
My father and I spoke often about all of these issues related to sort of integration. Bill Nunn, who was the great Steelers scout, was one of the first African-American scouts in the NFL. It's funny. In the book, I researched this and sort of unearthed a lot of the data that demonstrates how successful and effective Bill was. And, the NFL hadn't captured this data, not in the quantifiable way that we did, which is surprising. But when you look at the players from these historically black colleges, this is before there was integration. So they weren't going to Alabama. They weren't going to Texas. Penn State and the northern schools and the western schools had integrated in the 40s and 50s. So you're getting to the 70s where some of these other schools hadn't. And, now Joe didn't go to a traditional HBCU, but Joe Green would be recruited by Texas today. Yeah. Joe Green played at North Texas State. So many of these guys, Mel Blount, and so Mel comes from this experience. He had never had a white teammate or coach in his life before he came to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and talking to Mel about that experience I've gotten to know Mel pretty well. And the way he shared about my father and just how he said, I had whatever view I had of sort of white people, and your father just always treated me with so much dignity and respect. He said, we got in this really bad contract negotiation, 74, 75. We get the deal done, and I'm thinking, well, that's the last deal I'll ever have with this guy. And he says, I happen to open the Mel Blount Youth Home in Georgia, his work with at-risk kids. He said the first person to come visit the home on the opening day was your father. He says I didn't even not that he didn't invite him, but he just never had that expectation.
Right.
And so the way he described that story, I'm not really doing it justice, but just demonstrated that this was something my father really didn't just talk about. He didn't just talk about it from a strategic standpoint, but he had made this commitment. So then when you get to the coaching situation, 15 years later, my father helped put the rule into practice, and it ends up getting named after him. But what he really did was the next 15 years is every time there was an opening, he would talk to coaches, general managers, owners, and certainly he didn't, only advocate for minorities, but he really made sure that they had a good understanding of what candidates were available, because one of the things that folks said is, well, I'm not familiar who's available. So he just spent this tremendous amount of time familiarizing himself with these candidates and being able to speak on their behalf, so they would get interviews, they would get opportunities. And you see, not only was the rule named after him, and we can talk about the challenges today that are there, and they're there, but during his lifetime, you had a 300% increase in the head coaches in terms of head coaching hirings. You had an increase of 40% now total. It's completely switched, where 40% of the coaches on the defensive side of the ball are African American in the NFL. You had a 20% increase in on-field officials, and so it wasn't just sort of the policy. It was this work that my father committed his life to make sure that people were implementing this and carrying out, as Tony Dungy calls it, the spirit of the Rooney Rule.
Yeah, and I think when I was reading your book, I think the spirit almost goes back. There was a place in there that was a priest that used to talk to your grandfather
Father Glasgow talked to my father. And he became our parish priest, and he invited my father to go to Selma, Alabama, and my father didn't go on this march back in the 60s. And I talk about that as being a catalyst. Sometimes you don't do something, right, and it really sort of changes your mind. And my father sort of says that moment sort of made him realize, what I could do most for this issue of, they called it integration back then, right, is with my team. Can I make a real commitment? And he always wanted merit. He didn't want guys who weren't good enough, but can we make a commitment, to really integrating and giving folks an opportunity? And Chuck Knoll and Bill Nunn were just such an important part. They believed in those same things with him. And then you get the story of Joe Gilliam. And again, talking to Mel, talking to John Stallworth, talking to Donnie about when Chuck named Joe Gilliam as the first quarterback African American to start an NFL season. Right. Joe wasn't that successful, but what it meant to the rest of the players was, if I'm the best at my position, I'm going to get a chance to start here. And they conveyed the sense of trust as being so meaningful and so deep.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing thing that your family took on, your dad took on, created a rule change. And, there probably has to be some politics in it, because there are probably some owners that don't want to hear about that, right? They want to do what they want to do. They don't want to go by what other teams are doing, right? So for him to be not only a great owner, a great leader for your organization, but then to also be a great leader for the whole NFL, man, you must be really proud.
I am. And, the Rooney Rule has now gone beyond. Amazon uses it, Goldman Sachs. So it's kind of cool to see that legacy go beyond football. And that to me really indicates it's even more important.
So now when you do your keynote speeches and you go out and talk, is this a part of it when you're talking to companies, or do you try to integrate it if they want you to talk about something else? Because it is important. With immigration, we're all immigrants in one way or another. And, some companies, see it one way and other companies see it another way. Do you feel like that's a little bit of your responsibility when you make those talks?
I absolutely. Now, I try to pay attention. If I think there's going to be a lot of resistance, I talk about it more in relationship to change and having different opinions, and right, how, in the marketplace, you're going to have different opinions, you're going to have different points of view. And if you want to be able to serve the market, you better have some mindset that is not just a singular mindset. So I talk about it from that standpoint. Other folks have me come in and talk about diversity per se, which I'm not an expert in. I try to always bring an expert with me if that's what they want me to do. But when I'm talking to the corporate world, I talk about my father's work in hiring, I talk about his work in changing culture, and I talk about his work in negotiating. Those were sort of three of the main core competencies he has. And the hiring is a really easy story to tell. He hired three coaches in right. in 50 years. I don't know. You were on a couple teams that struggled. You might have had three coaches in one season. I know that's happened.
Yeah. I mean, that happens, right? I mean, look at the Browns now. They go through coaches every year. It's like, there's got to be some consistency. And I think that in your book, when you talk about the long game, that's part of it, right? Is the consistency. We're going to have ups and downs, but we got to have good, credible people that are running our team, so that those ups and downs are going to come, but it's always going to be the same that we can handle and deal with.
Well, maybe you can give a perspective on this, but I talk about him walking down the aisle of the plane after we lost, and I saw him do that 100 times. And I would talk to him about it. He said, look, I just want people to know you don't lose your cool. You know, you're going to have bad days. Things are going to happen. It doesn't mean we're not committed to a championship, but you can't be freaking out when things don't go your way, because then you're not going to be prepared for the next thing. I don't know how you as a player would see that, but he felt that was really important.
Valet, stay, and play on your next getaway to Los Angeles. The Westin Bonaventure Hotel and Suites offers effortless access to all the City of Angels has to offer. Whether you're hoping to catch a concert or sporting event, our hotel is just moments away from all the action and accessible to Hollywood, beaches, museums, and theme parks. The package includes a guest room and valet parking. For reservations, use promo code PSF in the code box when making your online reservation, or call 1-213-624-1000 and ask for promo code PSF. Well, when your boss, as you know, when your boss comes in and says, look, it's okay, let's just start tomorrow, let's have a better day tomorrow, let's learn from it and let's get better, right? That's a big difference than nobody speaking to you and you're in your own head flying back on a plane because you had a tough game and 3 interceptions, 2 of them maybe your fault, maybe 1 got tipped, and then you go home and you talk to your wife about it and you just lament about it over 2 or 3 days, and then nobody talks to you. Your coach doesn't call you. They don't want to speak to you because you lost this game that they didn't want to lose, and then it's like it really gets in your head. But when you would have somebody like that come down that aisle, and you would see him coming, and you know he was coming from a good place, your mood, your attitude changes, and I think that's why he was such a great leader for the Steelers for so long. Yeah,
thanks. He felt it worked, and it's always good to hear players' reaction to it, because he was, he tried to care for everyone, but he really cared for the players. He really understood the sacrifices you folks make, that your careers are going to be short, that you're putting yourself on the line physically, look, there's bad guys in every locker room. There always are, but the majority of guys are really good people, and they do good things that don't get half the recognition that some of the other stuff gets. And it was just really important to him that he saw that they had their back. The other thing that I rarely heard him talk about winning. He talked about being great, about being excellent, and he said winning will come if you're committed to being great. And I always thought that was sort of an interesting philosophy.
Well, I think it goes back to what a Pittsburgher is, right? It's about being authentic. It's about hard work. It's about being like everybody else, and that's what Pittsburgh really is. And I think your dad really did a good job of that, because when you hear about him walking home after games through the crowds and hey, I'm just one of you. I may be the owner, but I'm one of you. And that's what Pittsburghers, and that's what I feel is like, hey, I'm going to go out and cut my grass, and I'm going to do the things that everybody else does, because that's what my dad did. And that's kind of how we were all made and built, out of a steel town. And my dad was a mill guy, and it's just something about the authenticity of your dad that I think that the players fell in love with, that the people respected him. And that's why, they could definitely talk to both sides of the aisle.
Yeah. He was really good at doing that. And he never tried to be something he wasn't, and he wasn't a loud guy, so he didn't try to be loud. He understood that. Coach, I always think about, you talked about these talks I give, Coach Noll was the quietest guy I've ever known in success. Bill Cowher is boisterous, and, you want him to be your leader. Coach Tomlin is matter of fact. All 3 of them are completely different, but they're all effective because they're themselves.
Right. So let me ask you a question about your family. So there are 8 brothers and sisters, and you, and so you had all these great role models, right? Your grandfather, your father, and so when you guys, do you ever catch any of your brothers and sisters? If one of you get out of line, do you call them up and say, hey, remember what Dad would have said or whatever? Do you guys find yourself doing that sometimes?
Well, they would all say I'm the one that does that the most. So, we talk. I don't know that we do that, but we talk a lot about it. Look, we've had human experiences. Everyone else. We've lost 3 of our sisters have passed away from different diseases. one from cancer, one from lupus.
I'm sorry.
And yeah, thanks. But you know what I mean? So we've never sort of gotten on each other's back, but we're constantly in contact. It's funny, now that we text each other, we have a text chain, and we on game days, and we tell Art this, we have two different text chains, and one is all supportive because Art, he has a job to do. He doesn't need to hear us complaining about a guy dropping a pass. So,
right.
One you hear, all the support in the world, and then there's a couple other ones every once in a while where you're like, like every other fan, like, why couldn't he catch that ball?
Right. Art's like, I just bought him a new jugs machine.
Right, exactly. But you hate, this, Gus, and I hope that we have been as certainly connected to this community as my grandfather and father were. But there is a big responsibility my brother has. I mean, it is the job, and I don't say this, I hope people don't hear this as arrogant. It's the job everyone in town wants. So we really try to respect that his life is there's a lot of scrutiny there. Everyone thinks they can do his job. It's like a quarterback. It's very easy for me to tell you should have read that coverage different than you did, but no one's hitting me when I'm telling you that.
Right.
And in a, not that he has that physical risk, but that's sort of part of it. So the way we gather together, I think, is much more, hey, look, there's enough sort of pressure, and look, we're very fortunate. I don't want this to sound like a complaint, but there's enough stuff going on that we try to really be supportive, particularly of Art.
Yeah, well, Art has a big legacy to uphold, right? I mean, that's got to be a lot of pressure in itself.
Yeah.
And so I think he's doing a wonderful job. I think the Steelers organization is doing quite well. One of the things that I really wanted to ask you was, you wrote this book, you interviewed a lot of people. I read all the list of people at the end of the book that you got to talk to. What is your favorite part of the book?
Every part was wonderful in of itself. Paul Tagliabue, who spent really the most time with my dad on the business side, having him share those moments was really cool. The guys who had come from those HBCU experience, just a different life, until they're 21, and then they come to Pittsburgh and become part of this magnificent team in time. There's a guy in Ireland named John Hume who's considered the Martin Luther King of the peace process, and his wife, had me on the phone for 2 hours and she was crying. There's another guy who is a terrorist. This guy was in prison for terrorism, got out. My father was a guy who really worked with him about trying to sort of become a role model for the kids in this Irish community where they were all killing each other, and he talks about, and this guy's a big, strong, tough guy who has killed people, and he's in tears telling me about how my father helped change his life. So there was some pretty special moments there, and it was wonderful. And then Tony Dungy, the Rooney Rule side, talking to Tony about that, Paul, who had a lot to do with the Rooney Rule, but Paul was sort of the business side, and Tony was sort of how the coaching side transformed, and so it was nice. It was really cool to see Paul and Bill Cowher at the Super Bowl, and both of them told me at separate times that my father was their role model, and these two guys just got in the Hall of Fame, and to hear that from two different people like that, again, I don't want to be. It's not me. I didn't have anything to do with it, but it was just a blessing to have that experience.
Right. What an experience. What a, there's been tons of people that have written books about your family. I'm sure that, you have all of them on your shelf.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And now you got the right one about your family. It's either like, there's a couple ways it can go, but I think how you wrote a different way to win was beautiful. And I think it tells the story about your family really, really well. And, thanks for sharing that with us.
Well, Gus, thanks for having me, and just love seeing you do so well. I rooted for you. I rooted for hell like you, and I'll never forget when you headbutted the wall. I'm sure you're probably sick of that, but you were doing so damn good that game.
Well, you know what? It goes back to what we talked about earlier. right? I had a lot going on with my head coach who wasn't completely there. Like, you know what I mean? There wasn't a communication. Like, there wasn't that, what you talked about with walking back that aisle. There was never that with him. And that was trying to figure out what he wanted. And we were on different pages all the time. And so there was a lot of turmoil between us. Was having a good game and just was so excited to score a touchdown, ran in. And it's not like, hey, I'm going to jump off that wall and hit my head, but it happened. And, one of the things that I've learned from growing up in Pittsburgh was, there's going to be stuff that happens to you in your life. And you can either let it bring you down or you can just get back up on the horse and keep going. And to me, that's what being a Pittsburgher is all about. Like, I had one of the worst things happen to me in front of 80 million people watching it on TV. And still played another, 11 years after that. So things can happen in your life that, whether it's something like that's very embarrassing and hard to deal with, or it's a death, or we all have those issues. That's why this pandemic to me is not anything that we as Americans and Pittsburghers can't deal with. It's just, hey, it's going to be here. Let's do the best we can. Let's get it over with and let's move on. As Darryl Green always said to me, the most important play is the next play.
Yeah. But one thing I'll say based on what you just said, my father always said the worst thing you can do in a business is confuse someone.
Right.
And so, you're talking about those coaches confusing you. He said, that just is, it's the worst thing you can do in a business. So
yeah, that's why I work with Dr. Gary Russell out of Connecticut now. He has a company called Winning Profile, and he profiles you. And he lets you know who you are, so then people around you understand who you are and how to deal with you. I always said when I got into a huddle with 10 other guys, sometimes you had to yell at one. Sometimes you just had a pat in the back. Sometimes you couldn't even look at one, right? You just had to let them go. But everybody was different. And until you got to know those other guys, you wouldn't really get them to play their best until you knew them. And I felt like that's always been the case with me. You got to get to know me to bring the best out in me. So, hey, thanks for joining us on Huddle Up with Gus. You can find us on radio.com, wherever you listen to your favorite app or your podcast, and also on AMTV. One last thing, what we do, we call it the No Huddle. Jim, we have a little fun with this, and it's just a couple quick questions, and you can fire them off. I'll fire them back, and it's a lot of fun. It's the end of the show here. So first question is, what is your biggest pet peeve?
What is my biggest pet peeve? When computers don't work.
Like Skype. I hear you.
Right.
All right. Now, this is a tough one, right? This is a tough one, but you only can pick 4. It could be coaches, players, whoever. What is your Mount Rushmore of Steelers?
I'm going to sound arrogant here, but I know the Steelers pretty well. Art Rooney, Dan Rooney, Chuck Noll, and Joe Green.
Love it. Perfect. I love the forward by Joe, too. That was great.
Yeah,
that was wonderful. Okay. If you had to pick a favorite football player that was a non-Steeler, who would it be?
Jim Brown.
Jim Brown. Well, you were in Cleveland for a long time, so I guess that's, if you would have went to school over in New York, it might have been somebody else. All right. Now, if you could go back in time and give a young Jim Rooney some advice, what would that advice be?
I married a woman. We were both pretty young, and like you, we had kids right away. And, I at the time, I didn't know if it was the right thing to do and was the best thing I've ever done in my life. So I would say, don't doubt yourself on that decision, certainly.
Yeah, that does come in when you go back and think about when you were younger, what could I have done differently? And when my wife and I walk all the time, we say, we can't change anything that's happened to us. Like, let's just move on.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a good one. I want to hear this from you. Okay, if you could be commissioner of the NFL for a day, what's one rule change you would make?
There's a lot more than one.
Give me your top.
I would say this, well, they kind of fixed it, but it's the Jesse James catch thing. The guy has 2 feet in possession. It's a catch. We've all known that our whole lives, and we sort of started to ruin that with that. So that and this crazy interference thing, that drives me nuts. That they were reviewing interference last year. If I had control of a team, I would say run the ball.
Right, run the ball. Give me Rocky and Franco back and run the ball.
Right.
Okay, what is your favorite sports movie?
Gosh, I'm going to get in trouble because I should say a football one. There's a lot of football ones I enjoy, but Field of Dreams is my favorite football movie.
Yeah, that's a great sports movie. Okay, this is a tough one, and I don't think it'll ever happen. But will the Steelers ever leave Latrobe for training camp?
Well, we all hope that it never does. I do worry about just sort of where the whole business is going. Are you going to get to the point where they just do like 2 weeks of training camp, and then is it worth it to just not be in the facility? I worry about that because it should never happen, but I worry that football is going to drive us there.
Oh yeah, because a lot of teams. I mean, I came in '94, and we were all training camp, right? We went with the Redskins. We went to Carlisle. And it was just a great experience being with the guys for 4 weeks. But then now a lot of teams, as we went, said we're just going to have it at our facility, right? Why spend the money for a college and moving all of our equipment and weight room and everything else, and when we have it all right here and we can just practice our facility? But I think it took away from the fans because you couldn't just let the fans in the facility and see the guys and be a part of it. So I agree with you. It's kind of taken a little bit away, and I think the Steelers will probably be the last ones to not go somewhere.
I agree.
Okay, now, obviously you've written a book. You probably love to read books. Okay, are you going to pick a paperback, a hardback, or digital?
Well, what I do most is audio, listen to the book while I'm walking the dog.
That's a good one.
So that's actually how I get through most of the books that I want to read. But I would pick a hardback if it's just because it's sort of a better version of the book and everything.
Now, are you still a paper guy? Do you still get the paper? Or are you all?
I don't. I get everything digital.
See, my wife, we still get papers here because she has to have the physical paper, open it up, and read it all. So I think we're one of the only ones on the block.
We got to introduce your wife and my mother. She has been going out in COVID at 88 years old to buy the paper, and we're going crazy telling her she can't. But she needs the New York Times every morning. She wants to read it. And we're like, well, just get it delivered. And she's like, well, it's a day late if I get it delivered. And but she loves the newspaper.
Yeah, some people do. All right. Last one. This is the straight Pittsburgh fan, not Steelers. Okay, give me your favorite Penguin and your favorite Pirate.
Mario is my favorite Penguin, without a doubt. My favorite Pirate, love Willie Stargell, but, I loved Matlock back in the day, Bill Matlock.
Yeah, he was great, Bill Matlock. I've been trying to get him on the show. I'll inbox him, and he's like, well, you have to check with my PR person. I'm like, you got a PR person?
He's doing all right then.
Yeah, he's doing okay. But, hey, Jim, thanks for joining us in the huddle. It was great. I'll let you know when the episode airs. And, thank you so much again for joining us on Huddle Up with Gus.
Absolutely. Gus, thank you.
And everyone, don't forget, go find a different way to win. And you can listen to it. You can read it on your iPhone or, on your computer, or you can just buy the hardback cover. So, Jim, thanks again.
Thanks, Gus.
Take care.
You taking off?
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks. Really good to talk to you.
Yeah, no, it was, sometime when this is all over, maybe we go have a drink or go golf. Do you golf?
I'm a horrible golfer, but
that's all right. So am I.
I live on Diamond Run. You ever play Diamond Run?
Yeah, I'm a member at the Field Club.
Okay, I live on the 16th hole at Diamond Run.
And you just watch. You don't go out that much?
Not too much. I'm on Diamond Run every day. I got a giant dog, and I'm always walking around.
What kind of dog you have?
Bernie's Mountain Dog.
Oh yeah, they're great. I have a French Mastiff, Turner and Hooch.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is our second one. We got one for the kids, and we liked it so much. There's no kids, but we got a puppy 2 years ago, my wife and I.
Oh yeah, that's great. They're a lot of fun. They're great dogs. Billy Guerin has always had. If you know Billy from the Penguins.
Our kids went to school together, and we would walk our burners together.
Yeah. He's always had burners. Yeah, definitely.
Yep. Billy's a good guy. Have you heard from him up in Minnesota?
Yeah, I interviewed him 2 weeks ago.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Is he doing?
He was in his apartment in Minnesota, up in the sky. You know, everything's closed down for them, so it's been kind of strange. There you are, a new GM, and you're running his team, and then everything just. He said it was kind of strange.
Yeah.
But it's the same way for everyone, so he's not alone in it. Hey, we want to thank you for joining us today on Huddle Up with Gus, where we talk to a wide range of guests about how sports shape their life. As always, I'm joined by my great friend and co-host, Dave Hager, and we want you to be able to follow us on all of our social media at Huddle Up with Gus, and we really appreciate you and thank you for your time and listening to our podcast.